I actually dropped this in my cappuccino and just did it again. Welcome to this video about romance. Romance. I guess Valentine's Day is coming up, but that's not quite the timing. The timing was just a neuron fired. I'm not in control of this. I've heard that we don't have free will at all, but a neuron fired, and I wanted to talk about romance. I have written on a piece of paper, which I have filmed a gorgeous little cutaway for you, about romance. Somebody who knows about love is my stuffed animal, the boy. Me and the boy locked eyes at a bookstore in Pasadena, California, and the rest was history. But we're going to talk to you a little bit about love today. So, are you ready? Good. Let's start with the lesson number 1. That is, romance is a style. So in that way, it's like fashion, gardening, or art. It's a creative act. Why this is lesson number 1 is that it kind of explains the rest, I think, in that what I'm going to talk about is about style, about how you approach romance with someone. And it is an art. Why it's like gardening or painting or fashion is that throughout your life, what I've come to understand is that your style evolves as you change and as you encounter different people in different places. Romance is a style. I've witnessed many people's style of romance. I, being an Aries, if you believe in that kind of thing, and I have an Aries Venus, if you believe in that kind of thing, where I have a very forward approach to romance. To be honest with you, it's not been very stylish. In fact, it's looked like a quick splatter painting. Not a lot of method, not a lot of style developed, just pure. And that's had mixed results, let me tell you. But I've seen people's style, and my style has slowed down. And I've seen people have a very relaxed style of romance that is quite poetic. So you develop that style over time as you figure out, do I want to give you a book here, a poem here? Do I want to take you on a date here? I knew someone whose romantic style was like a capsule wardrobe. I knew someone, they would take different people on the same dates. So they had this whole shtick worked out where they'd pick someone up, flowers, go to the same like rotation of spots. And the dates liked it. But me from the outside, I thought, it's not my style to take people on, girl number 1 to this restaurant, girl number 2, the exact same thing, girl number 3, the exact same thing, the same car, the same flowers, the same restaurant, the same lines, like pickup lines. Some people do this thing like a factory, and others more of a one-off, bespoke piece of art that's crafted with somebody else. So, romance is a style. Number 2, and this one is so at the forefront of my brain right now, but number 2, pay attention to what blooms. It's a choice to nurture it like a flower. So, I think maybe why this is so strongly in my head right now is that I recently saw two people that I know develop an attraction. And I was there in the beginning when they were kind of new to each other's lives. And they have a natural chemistry, a natural spark. It was very sweet to watch. And that's the kind of thing you don't control. It just happens. That's kind of the beauty of you go out and you meet people. You never know. It just might happen. Some chemistry, some attention, you know? So something kind of comes up in this Venn diagram right in the middle of two people's lives, you know, or three. Sometimes this chemistry is nebulous, but it's not typically a choice, and it blossoms at its own speed sometimes. And I saw these two women, they had two very different reactions to that. One of them was very scared and very hesitant. She'd just gotten out of a relationship, and so this was a lot. And I watched her kind of close up some of the petals of the flower, if that makes sense, like the walls started going up. The other one, unfortunately, her style, her method was to try and force the flower open, peel its petals back faster than it was actually manifesting, because she was so into this person. She wanted to have this person, wanted to have her. And as a result, one of the women neglected the flower and the other one overwatered it, and they're no longer even going down that road. They're back as friends. Okay, they're back as friends. Now, they had the chemistry to make this thing bloom, but they were just in different parts of their life, and their style was really different. Sometimes I think you can relax into a flow and you respond to the other person. So maybe the one who was more, forward could have relaxed and slowed down to allow the more hesitant person to kind of get there naturally. We don't know if that would have worked. We can't see that reality. But sometimes that does happen, where you can kind of make something, you nurture a flower. You kind of choose to go at a certain pace once it's there. Or sometimes, no, you're just not in the place, so you can ignore the thing that has manifested. I think romance in those really nice early stages is that art of mutually caring for something, kind of back and forth. It's like you pick up the paintbrush and you make strokes together to make a picture. And when you put down your paintbrush to return to your own life after you go on a date or spend time with that person, it feels like, oh, I don't want to say goodbye. I loved that. I loved that moment. And it takes the two people to decide when to pick up again, how long, what they're making together, and you hope that there's some level of flexibility and relaxation, but that's the game. It's very much art, and it's very important to pay attention to what happens naturally with somebody, and then the style begins on how to care for that. Number 3, be accountable for romantic fantasies. Integrity of the other person remains a priority. I made a whole video about this, but this may be one of the most important lessons I think I've learned as an adult, because this is something I used to be very guilty of, and now I see it around me, just snuffing out potential And I also wrote a bit about this in a Substack article, which is essentially about beware of a construct. And I think I see constructs as important. Some people, it's going to be their style, but I view it as kind of the opposite of art, where I think that a healthy thing is to pay attention to what is naturally arising and to really slow down and look at the other person, really engage and get to know the other person. And I've been in many a situation, and I think back and I become very embarrassed because I was not seeing the person for who they are. It was more that that person was some kind of an archetype, some flat 2D image that fit a need that I had, or was somebody that I could project onto, or I fabricated a bit of a story for myself and wasn't accountable to that story. And that was a lesson I had to learn as I got a bit older. And now I still see situations in which somebody's kind of attached to somebody else and they really see a bit of a story instead of kind of relaxing into the poetry of reality. They really build something in their head that can't quite withstand the real elements in the world. It can't stand up against reality. And so I think fantasy and that constructive or constructive desire is important and kind of interesting, but I think it's good to be aware of it and to prioritize the real integrity and complexity of the other person involved. This has nothing to do with romance, but an example of a kind of constructed worldview that's then applied to the external environment is I was at an event where I was talking to a woman I didn't know, a stranger, who was older, I think in her 50s. I'm only in my 30s. And so I thought, no biggie, we're equal. Of course. No brainer. I think at any age, it's like, I don't know, I'm not, 17. You're an adult, I'm an adult. But it ended up being a very fascinating, kind of ridiculous, enjoyable, but ridiculous conversation because she kept saying things about my age. I was talking to her a little bit about my tattoos because she immediately latched onto those and was like, what the heck? Because I have my tattoos all over my arms and stuff. This one, she was like, what is that? And I've got my camel and I've got these kind of ruins on my arm. And of course I have a neck tattoo and hands, and she was like, what are those? And I was telling her about where they come from, which is the philosophical story in Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche. And I was talking a little bit about, I think that philosophy in that way really did pull me out of a rut in life. And she kept saying things like, she said, you're too young to be thinking about stuff like that. And I thought, what? That doesn't make any sense. She was very nice, very kind, but she kept saying, oh, you're too young to be like, you should be having fun. You shouldn't be worried about these kind of existential things. And I thought, that makes no sense. She said something else too, like, oh, I wouldn't understand because I'm too young. And it was something about this stress that she'd been having at work. And I thought, of course I understand that. I have a job, I live in the world, I'm present in the world. And she had these constructs of age that didn't make any sense. Instead of talking to me and believing what I was saying, or taking it at its value, it was filtered through this scheme. It was like water going through a sieve. Everything I said had to go through these holes, this structure that she'd made, and if it didn't fit, it was discarded. And it ended up being incoherent conversation. I teased her about it, 'cause she vapes, so I teased her about her vaping, talking about age. So we ended up having fun with it, but it was kind of maddening. It got to be fun because it was so maddening, and I just didn't accept it. So she'd hit something back at me, like, yo, you're too young, and I would just slam back, well, you're too old to be vaping. So it was stupid, but it's this kind of thing of like, you go into the world with a framework and a structure, and people either fit or they don't. A better approach, I'm gonna say better, maybe it's not, but I think better, is to relax and form your conclusions later, after you've taken somebody at their value. So the same, to me, applies with romance. Somebody is who they are, and then you can square that with your feelings for them. But maybe this is idealistic, because I think everyone does it, this rose-colored glasses kind of thing, where you're just blinded, maddened by desire and love. So that's my 2 cents, though, is to be as accountable as possible for romantic fantasies of the other person, the ideal image of the other person. Number 4, friends and family are best not triangulated in romance. Integrity of other relationships remains a priority. We think that this is a very important one. Yes. Oh, speaking of recently, I got asked by somebody, we're gonna call her Jessica. I got asked by Jessica to go spy on Rachel. Jessica really likes Rachel, and Jessica wanted me to go see how Rachel really feels about her, to a ridiculous degree. It's important to know that Rachel and Jessica are an absolute mess, and are on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again. And so when Jessica asks me to constantly go spend my time on Earth going to see what Rachel thinks of her, even though Rachel has already said a million, billion, million times, I only want to be casual, I get really upset. I think we've all, to some degree, been guilty of this, or have seen this, or been on the other side of this, where you're the family or the friend of somebody just madly into somebody else, and sometimes you end up being triangulated into somebody's mess of a situationship or a relationship. And I think one of the kind of brutal realities of, meeting somebody is that sometimes you just take off on everybody else and other relationships are sacrificed. I think it's so important. It must be so difficult, you know what I mean? Because you're obsessed with someone, your half of you is in Looneyville, but to maintain the integrity of your other relationships. And I think as the friend, like if you've got a friend who's just off the rails with desire and longing, to be able to say, like I did, hey, you and I have our own friendship, our own relationship. I don't want to be in the middle of your romantic life. And I told Jessica, she said, oh, are you going to an event with Rachel? And I said, yeah, I'll be there. I'll probably see her. And Jessica said, can you please just talk to her? Please just talk to her and tell me the truth, because I can take it. And I said, no. You paint your own picture. I'm not grabbing the paintbrush for you. You paint your own picture with Rachel. I'm not there to paint. I'm there to socialize. So, it's important, I think, as the friend, to say, hey, I have my own self-respect. And also, don't you want to ask about my day? And it's important, too, if you're the one in Looneyville with love, to give the friends a break from the Looneyville and say, hey, how are you doing? So I think that's a fair lesson on romance, is to maintain the integrity of other relationships. Lesson number 5. Now, this one is not so much about the short term. It's a lesson I have learned in the long term. In long relationships. Years and years long relationships. So, lesson number 5. Love will not replace your existential journey. Reinvention and change is the spice of life. 70% knowing. Now that's just, I smashed 3 different little sentences together, essentially. Because love, I have found, does not replace the existential journey. We truly do go into a lot of things alone. One of them being the deep reckoning with our own historical pain, our own behavior, and our own reactions. I smashed that together with the idea that reinvention and change are inevitable. You'll have to get a new job, you move, all kinds of things. And so, it's good to know a good chunk of your partner, but the rest, do you really need it? Do you really need to know 100%? Is that even possible? What does that say if you think that you've arrived knowing 100%? I don't think it's possible. I don't. There's a reality show that I love called The Boyfriend. It's about Japanese gay men who sell coffee in a coffee truck and get together and go on dates. Wow, so good. But one of the things that the host, I really like, they have these commenters that comment on the show as it progresses. One of them said something very profound, I thought, about 2 men who had kind of gotten a little bit infatuated with each other and were kind of freaking out. And the host said something along the lines of, you really should, 60 or 70% of your partner, and the rest is trust. And I think that, when I heard that, I thought, absolutely, that really squares with what I've lived through, where there's these core things about somebody that you really know, but life is nuts, and if you're going to be with somebody for years, change is going to happen, and it does happen. Sometimes it's brutal, but people are going to need different things at different times and for different reasons, That 30% is flux. This 30% flux and change and life up and down. I'm sure that long-term relationships, all of this is style and approach and flexibility and adaptability, and style should change, art should change, a garden should change, it should flourish. Sometimes it goes dormant only to spring again, but these are the lessons that I've learned on my time on Earth thus far, not yet turned into a particle, but manifested as a person. Now, having delivered these 5 lessons, I will say goodbye. Normally, I would stick around and say some BS, but I think there's a sport that is occurring, and there's just British men yelling and honking and cheering. I don't know what sport it is. I don't know if it's soccer or gay hockey or what. Yes, so to avoid them this evening, I shall say goodbye. We are going to say goodbye. But no matter your style or what you got going on, lessons you've learned, I hope that you have at least a romance with a great cup of coffee. There is no greater love than the love between a coffee bean and a coffee cup. I just made that up. Anyway, okay. I'm going to go make a sandwich, finish my coffee, and relax. Good night if you are going to sleep. And